Welcome to the 2-Month Review, a weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter 3% and our Patreon supporters. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I am joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
Hello, Chad. Hello.
And Katie Whittemore, translator extraordinaire.
Hello.
So, Brian, I have to say, I want to start here. Well, just to frame this for anyone who has never listened to this, and if you've decided that this is the episode that you want to listen to, episode 8 of season 17, the final episode of this season, you just want to jump on in, get your feet wet. This is a podcast in which we take a book, we talk about it for a long time, try and have some fun, try and entertain you. I guess that's the big point of this, is we want to have some joy reading a book. And this season we are doing 2 books, Eltit's Never Did the Fire and Daniel Hahn's Catching Fire, a translation diary that goes along with it. And as I said, today is the last episode, so we are completing the whole book. Everything's on the table. We could talk about anything. Spoilers, fine. Brian, start by asking you, I hope you had a good Father's Day.
Yes, I did.
And I assume you had a better Father's Day than Elon?
Oh, no. What happened?
Have you heard about Elon?
No.
I'm just going to read you a headline, both of you, and I want your hot takes. This is amazing. Elon Musk's teenage trans daughter has disowned him, saying she doesn't want to be related to him in, quote, any way, shape, or form, unquote.
Well, did she tell him that on Friday? Was that statement happen on Father's Day?
That's the day that showed up.
Well, if my dad was one of those lizard Illuminati people from ancient Babylon, I wouldn't want to be associated with him either. So good on them.
Unzip his skin suit and step out in his all his lizard glory.
Yeah, him and Jeff Bezos and the commissioner of the NBA, they're all lizard people.
They are super lizard people. Throw Rob Manfred in there while we're dissing those people.
I don't wish ill on anybody, obviously, and that's just I don't know. That's sad and that sucks, but I'm sure he's just not a good person. You can tell he's a terrible. He's a terrible bad person, and I'm glad his child was able to recognize that. So
same here. Kudos to them. Good job. Just run.
This is the
I'm
one
still concerned about Grimes. I'm still very concerned about Grimes' well-being. She's trapped in a house, much like the characters in our book are trapped in a house. See what I did there?
But are they together, or are they?
They are separated, but they continue to have babies together and
another baby. That's right.
Yeah, that has a name that I don't remember. That I think they're petitioning to change the name of the first baby too. It's all, I can't stand him, but he's litters my feed because I click on these fucking articles and then Apple's like, look, here's everything Elon's ever done, and I'm like,
interested in Elon Musk.
I'm crypto bro. I'm a crypto bro. How do you think I got this fly pad I have?
Yeah.
Dogecoin.
How do you live that glamorous lifestyle?
Yeah. How am I jet setting around the world? It's not on an academic salary. It's Dogecoin.
Yeah. Or what about, did Kaya sell a bunch of NFTs?
No.
Because she could put you in a mansion.
That'd be nice if I had a sugar mama and I have a sugar anyone. Give me a sugar daddy, give me a sugar mama. I don't give a shit. Elon, if you're looking for a new child, I'll become your child.
Oh dear.
How did you guys like the end of this book? Is there any point to this book?
Yes. Brian, go.
Question before you move on, Kate.
I was happy, everything that we were kind of honing in on was really ringing loud at the end with the bodies, the things being destroyed, the degradation, circling back to the child, the trauma of losing the child, the importance of the child, losing the cell, all of it it circled back into that. So that was satisfying that we were,
kind of right, or at least
catching those
at the beginning.
Yeah.
I've liked the ending more than I liked the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Because I like all that weird violence.
Yeah,
no, but I do think it's been I was sort of felt intrigued by how this was going to unfold at the end, and Chad, you texted me like, they're dead. They're all dead.
She's dead.
She's dead.
She's in limbo.
She's in limbo.
This is my argument. She is in limbo.
That's a good.
Dead the whole book.
I can see that reading. Do you want to expound?
So what was? I don't want to go back into the text. Do you remember what line I found?
No, but the untethered from time.
Untethered from time. Okay, so here's my argument. Here, let me start with the full argument. So they talk about the ether. They talk about like there's a line on 150 where it says there's no longer any point in trying to guess, or it's not that there's no point because I know and Jimena, is it, how do you say her name? Jimena, whatever.
Jimena, see,
Jimena knows that the two of you had another plan, a non-memo, secret word connected to an emergency telephone. You had planned it. It was necessary and it was fair. Yes, an emergency plan to dispose of the dead, the little boy and me, if we died. Yes, you did have it. Yes, that plan. And then on 155, there's now Jimena says to me, he killed you with a great blow to your head that destroyed your skull, and then he broke your hands. He knew he beat you to death. And on the very last page, we get, it's been a century with broken legs, my broken battered head. There's somewhere else where it talks about the hands again. And I want to argue that throughout this, we've been talking about the hands being broken and the pain in the hands, the difficulty of moving in the legs, the bones, the dissolving of the skin and the flesh, the sort of skeletal nature of it, that she has been beaten to death and had her hands broken, is dead, and that the 100 years, the 1,000 years, the fact that they're living in a state of no time is limbo, and that her going out to work on the people, to like help with the old people and the shit and all that kind of stuff is like her atonement for the crimes that she committed at earlier points in time as a active revolutionary. And this is a stretch. That one's a stretch. That one I don't really believe in. But I was and then people die because of her. And then she is atoning by going and taking care of in her limbo these old people who are abusing her and are at their end, and that's how she can finally get out of limbo. But otherwise, she's stuck there.
So she's a spirit.
She's a spirit,
and so she's not physically washing anyone's nether regions. She's just spiritually accompanying them at the end of life.
Yeah, helping transition their souls from like their decrepitude into the next world.
I don't know if you're going to get much of an argument from me. I think
this is all set up to be an argument.
I agree.
I don't agree with that part of it. I think it could still just be physical memories of things that physically happened, but they all circle around the decay of bodies and loss. Everything is loss. Everything is decay.
I think so. This is something I was reading yesterday. I was reading some articles and some reviews in Spanish on the original, and then in looking at and reading Danny's diary and like looking at how he has to parse how difficult it was because Diamela's language, there were so many internal echoes. He talks about the internal echoes, and even in this sentence that he kind of diagrams when you're talking about like the frente. So it seems to me that I can't remember what it was. It was one article was talking about how central to the novel in the original is the idea of like the decay of revolutionary language as well. And it's interesting because here at the end, she's talking about like sort of like these ghost figures. Like there's the other seven of them, right?
Yeah.
So it's her, Jimena, and the guy, and they're all like in bed. And then the other seven are going to sort of like wake up soon, and they're going to be, with their everyday complaints and their slogans. And I think I think that maybe what was difficult to translate and which isn't as strong in the translation as in the original is potentially like this importance of revolutionary language. I mean, we have that with the inclusion of the quotes from Marx and words like cell, and the cadres and then this, but that all of that, like language and art, was also supposed to be a site of revolution, and that failed as well. right? In Latin America, if we're taking this as the example. So, and you do see that in Latin American literature, and even to some degree in Bolaño, I would argue from what we talked about last season is that, the belief was that political and cultural revolution would be happening simultaneously, either they'd be happening together, or they'd be happening cause and effect, or as a result of one another, that there would be the artistic revolution was also not only possible, but paramount. It was a necessary condition to political revolution. And so we're seeing the political failures of the left, and we're also seeing the artistic failure of the left, and the failure of the left's use of language, which was this type of material horse. I'm thinking of it in Spanish, historical materialism.
Yeah.
We're looking at, the arguing over the marks, the use of the slogans, the use of this sort of tactical military language that is just as degraded as the physical bodies of these people who are dead and dying.
I hope that Diamello never listens to this, but in a way is the representation. I like how both of your eyebrows shoot up. You're like, stop speaking. Are we live? Is it about Ohio? They are fair game still. But no, that I think that one representation of what you're talking about is the difference between E Illuminata and this book. That E Illuminata is supposed to break language, is supposed to break and change the way that you think of art, of representation of the body, of representation of society, the way that it is uber poetic in a very fragmentary and challenging way that doesn't abide by the normal syntax grammar, normal use of language, and that this, by contrast, sort of does. So in a way, I could see this being, I don't think that this is a conventional novel by any means, but this is so much more conventional, almost as a reflection. That sort of urge or that impulse did not end up starting a revolution entirely. It may have had a big influence, but it didn't change. Kathy Acker doesn't have a lot of descendants.
Well, what's interesting too about that is that, that makes sense in that, so there's, a whole generation of revolutionary writers who are now, how old? In their 70s?
Yeah. Still
writing, still publishing, and they're living in this century, just as what she writes. It's we're out of time, we're out of our century. And so the failure of an entire generation to make both political and lasting political and artistic change. There's a sort of decadence and decline in this book that I think also speaks to not the decadence and decline of her as an artist, but in terms of what is possible for art.
Yeah.
Right? And what art can make possible. There's a sort of a sense of failure, of fracaso there.
It's all been co-opted, and the baby dies at the age of 2.
Or does the baby die before the baby's born? Does the baby die with, that's the question. And that's why I think, okay, he didn't kill her with a blow to the head, because, I think this is some sort of, a fantasy or an imagining or an invention of that. It's also kind of a metaphorical death, I think,
yeah.
In terms of, she comes to him pregnant. Also, we don't know whose baby it is, and that's something that I hadn't expected. I hadn't thought at all that it was going to go in that direction.
I thought of that last week when we were talking about the SDS, and when I was saying the thing about the women were supposed to just be available to be fucked all the time, and that was the ultimate freedom. But then if one of them got pregnant, that's an off the board sort of thing. So I thought of it in relation to that, but didn't want to bring it up until we got to this point.
So it's interesting. She talks about, when she and Jimena are sort of talking about, Jimena's I slept with everybody, every position, anytime.
Yep.
Everybody in the cell, and not just the cell, but the directivos, right? The higher ups. Mm-hmm. And they're sort of talking and laughing about this. And then we hear this, oh, wait, we need to go back to something too. We need to go back to the mirror domestic violence crime Crime of Passion that we talked about last week. I just
See, that's another one that fits into my theory.
exactly.
I forgot that was another one of the triggers.
Or is this like the fantasy? Like she's spinning out these different possibilities, right? But so back to what I was saying before about Jimena. I mean, so our narrator has been caught and imprisoned. Torture and rape as torture were used. I mean, rape was a weapon of war. A lot of revolution, a lot of political prisoners were raped, female political prisoners. So, I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility that she's been impregnated by, like, paramilitary forces. In which case, she comes back and she's going to bear that child, and he has to, deliver that child and possibly live with that child, and it could be like the child, literally, of the enemy.
Yeah.
No, it's just interesting possibility. Like she comes back, and I would assume she's like, he gets caught 4 months after her, I think, if I remember. I don't know. There's something to do with
he gets caught 4 months after she does.
So, and she's about to kind of give birth. Like she's probably really pregnant when they meet up again. So
it seems like she's like 8 months pregnant when they meet up again.
So it's possible that, he's not. I had just this whole time been thinking of them as like a conventional couple. Like that's what I had assumed and read into it, was that they were this sort of like more like they were, like a couple, boyfriend and girlfriend, and they're like in a revolutionary cell. But it's like that was maybe something I was assuming that is not correct. Was reading more into that.
And the movie version will be much more romantic, I'm sure.
Like since they were teenagers,
Yeah.
and they're gonna like make revolution together.
Yeah.
So Brian, what's your take on Chad's theory?
I could get down to like half of it, but I think the way it ends, it's no matter what you do, it's meaningless, because I like the juxtaposition of the two horrific deaths. You can rob a bank and get shot in the face, or you can just get in a car crash, but it's the same fate. You're dead, and then there's this bureaucracy that stands around kind of showing their power in this kind of meh kind of way, and it's just clogging things up for everybody else.
Yeah. I
really like that image of those two deaths in the last couple of pages before it describes her own. And I was really, and it could be metaphorical, but I do like that it's a trauma to the head and trauma to the hands, because it makes me think your thoughts are no longer, I'll take your thoughts from you and I'll take your hands from you. You can't do anything. You can't think anything. You can do nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, like it's it's this exact mirroring on page, where is it? 135 from last week. Yeah, 135, when she says, the blow to the head dizzies her, and she understands that she ought to get up on her 2 feet and try to run away. And then it broke both both her hands. This time she really is going to be killed. A crime of passion, another one, my own. And last week that didn't make much sense. It was like, she was imagining herself in that woman's place. But yeah.
I have a question for you related. I have a bunch of questions. I'm trying to find a pen that you guys have both sparked to me in the past few minutes as you were talking. One is in relationship to that, Katie, do you think reading this book in sections slowly is not the best way to read the book? Should we perhaps have done this as like reading this book in like 4 episodes and reading the diary in 4 episodes, and rather than reading this in 8 episodes in which you don't get to connect those pieces? And I mean, I think you have another book example that's sort of like that you think should not be read in pieces, something.
Is it time for me to plug a forthcoming Jalki archive title?
Whoa, that sounds amazing. That sounds like a good idea.
Well, I'm helping to edit a really amazing book by Carla Marufo, who's a Mexican writer, and it's translated by Alison DeFries. and it's a similar sort of like winding through time with like a really unstable narrative voice. Like there's a lot of repetition, there's looping and re-looping a lot, and whole sections are repeated with like one or two small variations. And so it's this feeling of like that I physically have this feeling of, you want to be carried along. That's what the text is asking of us, right? Is to sort of be like in the flow of the text. And there are places, right? So you could have an arbitrary interruption, which we created in breaking this up, or it can be it can be other types of interruptions in the text. It can be something that as a translator we need to rework, or it could be something stylistically, right? Like I'm even talking about the use of italics. Mm-hmm. Like I'm saying, like, because there's no the whole thing is written in lowercase. There is punctuation, but everything's in lowercase. So like I come across an italic and I don't want to see the italic because I'm already in a particular flow. So yeah, I think some text it does the book a disservice to take the reader out of what should be maybe a bit more free flowing, where like we would experience the resonances and the echoes without having to be like, oh, that seems familiar. Hold on, like I think 3 weeks ago I saw something about that. I think we would feel like this different kind of internal rhythm to the book if you were reading it not so start and stop, not with so much time distance between sections. That's my opinion.
Related to that, to build off of that for a second, and if Danny's listening to this, Danny or anyone, Sam, Caro from Caroline from Charco could help out with this. If you could send me the word file, I would like to run a linguistic analysis on this and see what the most common words are in their orders, because we've talked about like body, we've talked about bone. If you look at different, the resonances, metal shows up a lot. I would love to see that. I know that it's like applying math to literature, but like at the same time, I'm very curious as to like what those main words are, which is this is like a double hinge sort of question. But the other thing was when you mentioned about the degradation of language and of revolutionary language, what is revolutionary language now? Like the revolutionary language that is most prominent in my mind is that of the 60s and 70s, is the Communist Manifesto, is the historical Marxism. I was like a Marxist person, took Marxism as a freshman, and like was very into that sort of linguistic nature and that way of like analyzing the world for a long time and like in college and elsewhere. But that language doesn't hold anymore, really, I don't think. I mean, there is like, I know this is coming from a place of some semi-ignorance in that Verso does publish like 1 billion Marxist related books. And there is a new set of language and of linguistic sort of terminology and of ways that you address that. But like with the common people, what is our revolutionary language now? Is it been degraded, like you say, from the time when we talked about comrades and, the bourgeoisie and use that as a criticism and use those loaded terms that people knew what they meant and they had like a certain amount of revolutionary power?
I mean, you could have anybody, it wouldn't matter, people weren't necessarily, I mean, there were university educated people that were studying Marxism and reading sort of from like a philosophical standpoint. But, one would assume that there would be people who were not, coming at this from a traditionally educated background, and that they were very, very well aware of the means of production, and they were able to talk about
exploitation of labor.
I mean, I don't think that what's our revolution now? That's the question. So what is revolutionary language? Non-binary, like gender? I mean, I think that we're in a new place of
intersectionality.
We're in what's the revolution? What are people trying to make change?
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a follow-up question to that before you go on? Is a follow-up question is capitalism just get a pass now? Because that was the focal point of all of this. Was capitalism was tied to racism, was tied to like oppression, and I don't feel like that's really the aim anymore.
There's a larger, I think I feel like, there's the intersexual part, but there's, it's also more, it's still tribal, but it seems more individual. And then it's also more environmental.
Environmental too.
I think so, but
Yeah.
I don't know. That's one small opinion.
No, I think that's really interesting. Like, I think you have to look at what type of revolution are people agitating for, and then it would be very interesting. I'm sure this is being done in social linguistic classes and research across the world, but to look at that language of sort of activism, climate change, other types of advocacy. Yeah, no, I don't have it.
One of the books I was going to recommend for a future season, the 2-month review, is this one. Is I Hotel by Karen T. Yamashita, which is a long book written in English, but it is very much about the West Coast sort of revolution in this period of time, the 60s, 70s, and especially related to Asian American communities and the Black Panthers and that part of this sort of movement. I kind of feel like this is sort of going off topic from these books, but this book does inspire in me an idea that we should do one of two different types of a next season, one that involves like digging into the revolutionary side of things, because this sort of inspires me to think of more of like Vineland, this book, things that are in that ilk that there was a particular moment in time in the world history, but especially American history, in which things were at play, and it has since like changed, altered, denigrate, or come down from there, been co-opted. The other is that there's a series of authors that are like Anne Quinn, Eva Feige's, what you just said about like the repetition and the echoes or whatever. Eva Feige's Nellie's version, which we'll be reprinting sometime soon, which I absolutely love. And D.S. Johnson and that group of like British experimental writers did things that were similar to this, but maybe also interesting. If we did a set of their books, that could be really cool too. Anyways, that's like off topic for all of our Patreons who get a vote on the next book that we want to do. If you subscribe at the $10 or higher level, I don't know, whatever, figure it out. It's on the Patreon /
patrons, just figure it out yourself.
Figure that shit out. I don't have it open right now.
That's also another topic. I don't know if it's to discuss now, but it would be interesting in the future. But that idea of what role does art have in revolution?
Which ties into 2666. Like, is this a theme that we've sort of developed here? And like one side of it is the linguistic that you're talking about, Katie, in terms of like what is possible within fiction, which is something I'm very interested in terms of structure. Like I just read those two Spanish books that Delkey did, The Irish Sea and Double Room. And the structure of those is so unique and interesting and fascinating and makes those books really cool in terms of like upending what would be a conventional sort of narrative. And then there is also the revolution of like, what are we fighting for sort of revolution, I guess.
Well, and it's interesting because like, I think this is a time where I see this sort of difference in generations, and truly like in things that I'm interested in and what I read and what I wanted to talk about and learn about in college and beyond, and you know, the types of books that I liked and the type of theory I liked, and seeing like now I'm like, wow, like I am out of step in a lot of ways with like what's happening now. And so, you know, in 2666, like the idea that like, well, what has the university become? What is the university? And it's like, yeah, well, those are the olds that say that. Like the olds can, you know, be complaining about what the university has become, but there are people who are that they're living that life. They are making the university at this time. And so, yeah, but I mean, I do think that's really fascinating. And I think it's interesting too, to look at, I mean, I would be really interested in looking at sort of like the most revolutionary literature being produced now, like what's being written in 2022, 2023, 2024, that has like as at its core, like a revolutionary attitude. What are they writing about, and what kind of revolution do they want? And is it counter-revolutionary, or is it actual revolution? You know, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but I wonder. I would love to hear what people
be interesting
reading.
If anyone's listening, if anyone has any suggestions of books that fit into what Katie's suggesting, or anything that you think we should cover in the future seasons, please DM us, email, or just tweet it at the 2-month review Twitter, or do we have an Instagram? No, we don't. Just a Twitter account. do that, because it would be interesting to see that too, because I don't come across a lot of books that fit into what you're talking about.
And it doesn't have to, and it doesn't have to necessarily be political, but
no, but I mean, like, just generally speaking, I feel like things are fairly tame.
I mean, well, I don't know though. I mean, no, I don't think that that's true, but I think that our concept, I think that we still have a concept of revolution that harkens back to a time that where we were not. I mean, we're like receiving these stories from the generation that was before us, and even just a little bit before.
Yeah, like when we read Native Son by Richard Wright, like it really hits home for us, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, I mean, I think that there are revolutions.
Yeah, but what is that book now? Like right now? Yeah, I do want to know. I do want to read it for sure.
What is that book right now?
I don't know.
Are there books like that right now, or is that happening other places? On Twitter, for example.
But more importantly, does it even matter? Does it do anything? Does it move the needle? No,
Well,
but it does not mean it's not necessary.
Right.
And essential. Right.
Or does it move the needle, but the needle doesn't move very far? And is that, I don't know. Is that what progress is? I don't know. Somebody smarter than us can tell us.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the diary. Chad, are you still there? Are you awake?
I'm awake. I'm looking up stuff.
Okay, don't leave us. Come back.
Yep.
You don't need me. You guys go on. I
did have a question for you about the diary. He had made towards the end where he talks about after letting it cool for a couple weeks and waiting to hear back from the author, and then where he starts feeling like he's hitting that stride where he's got the voice, he understands the narrator. How do you know when that clicks for you? Or do you have projects where you're like, I don't know if I really nailed that? Or do you have ones where you feel like you really hit it, and there's ones where you're like not in the vein?
Yes. There are some when I feel like I've really hit it. And those are like maybe say recent translations that I will look at in 6 months and say, wow, how did you possibly think this was acceptable? Or how did you miss this thing? Yeah. And like, so I have this, it is a fascinating thing. And I think it must be, I don't know, it must be the same. Is it similar? Like for when you're looking as a writer of your own original work, like do you look at things and say, yeah, I would leave this just as is. I mean, with translation, I really feel like you really, really could revise forever. And I have these, the triptych project is coming out in July, and I wanted to send in like a little video to the Translators Aloud YouTube channel of like reading a little bit from each book. And so I was looking at them last night, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't think I could, there's not even a page I would want to read and videotape, and it's like they're coming out in like a couple of weeks. And at one point I thought they were great and they were all ready to go, and you always find things. But yeah, I mean, I think you get to a point where you have to accept it. If you have the deadlines, like Danny says, a lot of time it's just like, no, I'm sending you these proofs, and you have to just like make sure your name is spelled right. And then that's it. You can't send me any of the changes. That's it.
Well, I'm sure it's a clunky analogy.
Okay.
What?
Okay, so not to sell out the intern, I won't name them, but I had an intern go through Harry Matthews' Cigarettes and like the new edition of it that's coming out, and put together like the scan file and get it all together. And they misspelled Harry Matthews' name on every single page in every single instance.
Because it was one T or two. He put
one
two T.
It's only one T in real. It's only supposed to be one T, but yeah, check the names.
Well, there's instances of that happening.
Yeah, I was just curious though with the translation process, if it feels like, if this is a clunky analogy, it's fine. But like it's almost as if you disassemble something and you're putting it back together. So at one point it's just a corpse, and at like when does it get that like it's alive, like
The Frankenstein
yeah,
shape.
right, like because there's this idea of like taking it apart and then putting it back together, and then like where's the spark? Does, like, if it's a car, if it's a machine, does the engine turn over? Does it come alive? Is it ready to you know what I mean?
Totally. And I think there's two things I want to say to that. One is just my own sense is that, you know, when Danny talks about coming back to the book and reading the book as a reader and saying, okay, like I know who this narrator is now.
Yeah.
I think for me, like the most productive revision work and finding like where you are sort of like getting things set into the rails is really, really working on voice and saying like do these words, do the choice, you know, you have all these choices of words, right? That you can put back together, as you say. And it's like, does it fit best in this puzzle piece, you know? And when you kind of feel like you're nailing the voice, I think that's when the book really starts to come together. Robin Myers has a piece out, an interview out in Latin American Literature Today. I just was reading it yesterday, and she says it so much more eloquently and beautifully than I just said. And I think I'd love to link to it, out in the show notes if we make a note. But she talks about approaching translation as a cover artist.
Okay.
Like as a band. And I thought that was perfect. It was like, yeah, like you're going to have your own riffs and you're going to, you know, I mean, it's just perfect. I think it's a wonderful analogy.
And every now and then you have All Along the Watchtower where the cover is better than the original.
That's true.
And that's okay.
That can happen. And again, that's the evolution of an artistic product, right? And it's the versioning. I think the more that we think of things as versions as opposed to replacements, the better. Mm-hmm. The more enjoyable the experience is too, because you're not trying to like catch anybody out for, you know, did they do a good or a bad job? It's like, no, it's a different product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really beautiful. I also love that analogy because, and she's a poet, as you know, and I think that it speaks to the importance of and Yanni talks about this too, the importance of the ear and the importance of like the musicality and of sounding things out and of reading out loud and of making sure that like, you know, if the book is prose poetry in the original, like it needs to be prose poetry in the translation. And that's hard because not everybody writes prose poetry. So if you have the, you know, the good fortune of working on someone's book that has that type of lyricism, I mean, you really need to try to replicate that, and that can be really, really difficult. And that is something that I struggled a lot with Laura Moreno's Wolfskin, and I'm reading this book that Alison DeFries translated, the Mayo, and I'm seeing this, and it's like, wow, you know, it's this whole other level of translation where first, you know, you go through the first draft and you just want to make sure that you're getting like that you're doing like service to the original, to like, you know, as much of the meaning as you can. And then later it's going through and saying, it's just refining or tuning. And I don't know, what's that like in your process, Brian? Like when you write?
Yeah,
do you
I think
read things out loud? Like, do you pay much attention to how things would sound, or is that?
That's like King Daddy for me, is that you're like, if it doesn't sing, it's dead. Like, and every student I'd say, like, I don't like, if you don't learn anything at all from me, just read your work out loud and your ear will call out all the bullshit every time.
I love that.
Like, you don't need to major in music to know if somebody hits a wrong note. Like that's an opera singer that their whole life is singing.
Yeah.
And if they hit the wrong note, you as an idiot will know it because your ear is that good.
Wow.
And so you don't have to be a great editor. You don't have to be a great writer for your ear to be like, dude, that sucks.
Yeah, that's not right.
And you can't hear it unless you're reading it out loud. So like, I'm really big on, it's got to be out loud. It's got to sound good. And if it doesn't, it's not good enough to be on the page. Get it out of there. Like, yeah, totally.
It's really great.
Totally. Yeah.
I think that's something that like I think we need to have that hammered home as translators as well. I mean, maybe more explicitly. I think that that's something that, you know, when you workshop a piece or that you would have in mind, but I think few people actually, you know, and Danny talks about being able to sort of like, he reads the work silently, imagining it out loud. But I actually think that reading it out loud, there's something to that. And I'll find a lot of times, like Chad and I edit this way a lot when we read stuff out loud. And there'll be times like if I read you something, Chad, I'll change it. I'll change what it says. Like I will say something that's not on the page. Like I'll change a word and you'll be like, okay, well now there's something that you need to go back and fix in the translation because you didn't even say what you had written yet. You said something else and it sounded better.
Yeah.
So like you can trick, your mind sort of tricks you as well. Like when you're in the flow of that is you do sort of come up with what does sound best when you're speaking aloud. That's cool.
It's one of those old school like metaphors that every old man uses in their book about books or about reading, where reading internally and not saying it out loud is actually a relatively new phenomenon. Like people would always read, like things were oral, like you read the script aloud. People would move their lips. Like it was kind of move your lips as you were reading, even like when people started reading internally, and then becomes a much more fragmented process now where like reading is silenced, is not verbal, and also is in that way less communal in a way.
Yeah, I like this example.
You do in your eyes, you do trick yourself in your mind into like what was there and what wasn't there, which is the difficulty of not reading it out loud. Right. With someone watching you, or watching the words at least. You know what was weird? So this is weird, but I'm going to just bring this up because I've never had this happen before, but it is an option for translators and for writers, just so you know this. So Katie, this happened with you and I a couple of weeks ago. We were going over your sample that you did for Nuria Labari's new book, of whom we'll be reading tonight. Tonight is Wednesday, June 22nd in Valencia. If you happen to be listening to us in Valencia.
If you're watching us from Valencia, come see Nuria Labari.
In like
novel, the last
in like a few hours.
Yeah, what time is it? You can make it, guys.
So if you can fly over, get there.
Well, maybe we have listeners in Spain.
What's that?
Maybe we have listeners in Spain or in Valencia.
I mean, we very well do, and I think we do, but like I don't know if they're watching us at this moment in time. But the point is not that. So Nuria's book, when I open up the Word file, I hit something and it started reading it aloud. And there's a feature within Word that will read aloud to you what's on the page. So if you don't have someone, you can hit that. It sounds awful. Like it's very robotic and like it's not even Siri level, but it does force you to see and hear each word and see what's missing.
On an Apple, you can highlight your text and there's a dictate speech button.
That's it.
And
that's what I did.
I use this one all the time because if you can make the lady robot voice, if it sounds good when she reads it, like, oh, you are golden.
These are new tricks. This is really interesting.
Because it's just this cold robotic reading, but if the dialogue sounds alive, if the text is vivid with her reading it,
right?
You're like, wow.
Oh man, like, nailed it. Yeah.
Nuria Labari.
Yeah. But when it sucks, boy, it really sucks. Yeah. So yeah, she totally exposes flaws when you have the robot read your work to you, big time.
Which is very different from the AI advertisements I get on Instagram for your AI girlfriend who learns who you are and provides like different sorts of input. This AI, not very cool.
Yeah. I like this line from the diary as well. It's near the very end. It says, most of those who come to read my translation will be people who would not be able to access DML's novel in Spanish. The aim of my translation and the reason for all the fuss that's taken me to get there is to allow them a proxy experience that's as precisely the same as the other book as possible in all its brilliant, ambiguous complexity.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I really like that sentiment of like, why the hell are we doing all of this? Why all this work? Why all this pain? Why all this struggle? Why all this stress? And it really is kind of a wonderful gift to not be able to read the original language, but have access to their thoughts and what they have to say. I mean, That's really cool. It's the point of all of this. So
It is the point.
thank you both for all the work you do and making that happen for people like me that otherwise wouldn't get access to any of this. So,
Well, what I want now is for you as a writer yourself and as a teacher, I want you to workshop my translations as if they were pieces of just creative writing and really show me, could pick apart those flaws. I think that is a really valuable experience too for translators.
That's what we used to do.
Get out of the translator bubble, and have the work treated not as a translation. Have the work treated. If that's what we really want, then we need to be ready to accept the fact that some of our translations suck. And like we wouldn't necessarily be good writers,
Sure.
or we need a lot of work to become really, really great writers. Like that's, so I think that's a really exciting place to bring your work as a translator, is just to have it workshopped as if it were a piece of creative writing.
That's what we try and do in Plube every week here.
Yeah.
Or I do.
Yeah.
And you used to, Brian, when you came.
Oh, those were the good old days. I'll be back at some point.
Any last things?
What do you think of the process technique on page 172, where he takes the one sentence and breaks it apart into the various components, discusses each one, and then brings it back together at the end as an exercise?
Oh, I think it's an awesome exercise. I would like to do this with a sentence. I think what this really does is break down how much we do automatically and take for granted in the process. It's like, no, like I'm translating something right now, and it's that first draft, and I'm just type. And I just have this vision of myself, like I'm sitting in front of the computer and I have the book open over here, and I'm just like this. I'm just looking at the book and not making like deliberate choices at all. And so to have to do this is to really have to look. You have to see the nuance, and it might be something that is surprisingly nuanced, that if you do not stop and think about it, you might just go with whatever that first inclination was, and it's probably fine. But again, when Brian talks about things being able to sing, it's like a lot of stuff is okay, and a lot of like your first impressions are fine, but there are these moments where if you do something like this, like I'm looking here at like the involucrados example, which to me is like involved in, but and he also said it can be wrapped up in. Like for me, it sort of thinks like they're involucrados like in their own world, right? They're wrapped up in something, but because it's going to have those nuances. And involucrados too, like has, I think for me anyway, in Spain Spanish has like an idea of, could be like a criminal element of it, like someone like is involved in a plot or involved in a plan. And so, I think with what Danny's saying about DML's language, and that there are these echoes of this exploration of like a revolutionary language, trying to hit all those nuances, you have to really pick things apart, which he does here. Like the difference between, choosing like pursued and persecuted. That was really, I think it's cool.
Oh, right. Pursued. Yeah. I
mean, you could do this. You could have someone do this, obviously, just like in a creative writing workshop too. Like say you pick a sentence that you wrote. Now let's, break it down and look at the various elements. And are there other options there? Are there other choices that would make that a stronger solution to whatever you're trying to express? Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Very cool. I like that as an activity.
Yeah.
As a concept, as a whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Dang.
So
any last thoughts on the diary or anything?
So with the diary, like I can see, I think it's interesting. Like, I've gotten stuff out of the diary. I think it's interesting. to think of it being published as a standalone book. I don't have a judgment on whether or not it's valuable or not valuable to do that. I do think what's interesting and which potentially points to it being more valuable, like in the blog format, was that these examples of the real-time interaction with people that are following the process. So like, I like that there's this interactivity with people, you know, with people that are postulating things or offering solutions, or, so like the idea of like the translator documenting their process, but having it be something that's valuable for the translator as well, which has to be in real time where people can offer feedback, I think ultimately is probably more valuable than having it in like a set book form. But it's interesting. I mean, I don't know, for someone like Brian, I mean, Chad, you and I are like, so we have like translation just like, you know, stuck in the brain all the time. But Brian, like, did you find this interesting or like helpful for process stuff, like what translators do or worry about or how they think?
No, I think it was just, you know, it's more of a curiosity of seeing how the sausage is made and just an appreciation of all the struggles that you have to go through. Yeah, I have no desire to translate anything. I enjoy reading translations, but yeah, no, I'm not crazy. I don't want to do what you guys do. What you should do is a translator Twitch live stream where you just put your you don't know what Twitch is? Oh my gosh, you are one of the olds. You are one of the olds.
I am. I fully admit it.
Do a live stream. We can talk about it off air, but that would be cool.
What's the platform?
Dude,
what do you live stream on?
Twitch.
On this? StreamYard?
No, on Twitch. On Twitch. We could do this on Twitch. We could do this as a Twitch podcast, in fact. Or live stream instead of YouTube.
It allows for a lot of interaction because there's a chat that's constantly streaming while you're videoing.
That sounds really fun.
There's an example that's real embarrassing of Pulitzer Prize winning author Joshua Cohen trying to essentially live stream. I don't think it was Twitch. I think it predates that platform, but live stream himself working on a new book where people could comment on it. And it went on like what he was writing, and you could see him. I want to say that when I watched it, he was shirtless, but I might be inventing that detail. Regardless, that's not a bad idea. That's not a terrible idea to get viewers. But as he was writing, it took like
it depends on who's topless.
Yeah, it depends on who's topless. Like nobody wants to be topless. It would go from like 70 viewers to 0 in 1 second. It'd be like button down, baby. Let's do the upbird. I love how you guys shut down my attempts at expressing my sexuality. Like I don't even understand what's going on here anymore. It took about 20 seconds for it to go from like something actually relatively positive to people just like insulting him and becoming like, you know, the worst sort of like cretinous internet troll version of stuff. So it like went out of control and didn't work so well. But I think that there's a way that you could do that on Twitch, and it would be kind of interesting.
I know,
you can what you should do, Katie, is have Brian workshop YouTube, read your translation aloud and YouTube workshop it.
That would be really interesting.
That could be fun.
People would listen to that.
Maybe, or maybe they wouldn't, but it would still be helpful.
Two Luddites trying to figure out how to make machines work. That's going to be great.
Let's ask.
I'll watch it.
Let's ask our 2nd and 3rd graders. They probably know.
Yeah.
They probably know.
Anyone got a
favorite line? Oh, I was like, well, let's wrap it up. Favorite line.
Well, I read mine. It was from the diary.
Shut down. I'm done.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here. My favorite line is just the line that says "so tall" because this book hates short people. The end.
And one-armed people.
It hates one-armed people. It really hates short people.
Okay, let me see.
And while she's finding, remind us how we're going to know what our next project's going to be.
I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. I did look it up, and I think I'm going to change it, but like we'll change it so that at the $10 level, you can vote on the next book if you're a patron on the Patreon platform. At the $10 level, you'll be able to vote. We'll put a poll up there for anyone who qualifies for that. And right now, it's set to be at the $25 level, and I'm changing that.
Okay.
Just FYI for anyone listening, it'll
that
change.
This is so capitalist. If you have some money, you get to choose things. I see how it is.
Yep. Well, I'm pro-capitalism now. Revolution is over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got to get you guys some microphones. Gotta get some cash.
Yeah, seriously. I've got headphones with the cord still, so yeah.
I know. I was gonna try and use these in here, but like last time I did that, it got all jacked up. So I figure I just will go with this. But yeah, we are the most low rent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a favorite line. Nothing favorite. Oh, that's not true. I guess I like this. I thought this was pretty funny. When, so Jimenez telling her over and over, like, he killed you, and he and like Gomez had the plan. Mm-hmm. And then the old cells arrive, frozen or frightened or severely faulty. They all arrive, and I almost don't recognize them, but there's no reason I should remember every one of them, right? The bed, our bed, the usual one, resembles a sub-proletarian hostel from another century. And I really thought that was a great image.
I forgot I had one other one, was that because this shows up. So two things showed up in this section that Danny talked about earlier and that we kind of went over, but we didn't have the referent part. One is investigating judge on page 140. That finally shows up here, but we talked about that last week in terms of mothers don't and in terms of like whatever. And then hoik on 144. I hoik them up into the washing machine with all the strength I have. And I take off my plastic gloves. That's a word that earlier on in the diary, like way earlier, he's like, I love this word a lot, so I'm just going to include it.
I'm going to find a way.
Yeah. Or like, he's like, I'm glad that I had the chance to use this word that I really like. So props, that's the other one. I'll go with so tall and hoik. That's my line of the week.
It is.
There are 3 words. Got anything, Bri?
Nope. It was a good.
Well, he already did his.
Oh, he did. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay. Next season, maybe?
Yeah.
Something else.
Sure.
You guys send some suggestions. And anyone who's listening, send suggestions. We'll find something fun to do. It'll be a good time.
Yeah, just torture us. Something long and something difficult. It's always my favorite.
Something that I've been looking up. I've been looking up the whole time we're talking. Most revolutionary books of the past few years, and I shared this publicly, which I didn't realize I was actually entirely doing. But not this line. There's one that's the most 7 revolutionary books by Latina women, and it's like House of the Spirits, like In the Time of Butterflies. And like not what we're looking for. I wasn't able to find any good list of like things. So I asked a couple of booksellers as we were talking to see if they could send us a list of like other books that might be under consideration. But anything that anyone who's still listening, please send us whatever books you think we should cover that are long, difficult, fit in, that you want us to talk about, that you would appreciate hearing someone break down, that would be fun for us to read. And then we will put up a poll within the next few weeks on the Patreon site. If you're a member at the $10 higher level, you will be able to vote. And then we will choose from there. And we will announce it sometime in the not too distant future. And hopefully we'll all be back soon to keep talking. I'm going to miss you guys.
Likewise. Thanks, guys.
Wish I could say the same, but I'll try.